Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am going to introduce Beth Hennis, the WSDLC Board Chair, to get us started.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the 2026 WSDLC membership meeting. I'm Beth Hennis. I'm the current WSDLC board chair. And this meeting is a great opportunity for members to come together from around the state to reflect, to learn more about the WSDLC, and then to look ahead to what's next for the consortium. Since 2018, when the WSDLC launched with 89 districts, we've now grown to over 330 districts and serve nearly 520,000 students. In fact, the WSDLC reached a milestone of 10 million checkouts this year. We have a very special guest today, author Joseph Sieracki. Did I say that right? Okay, good. Who we will introduce following some other introductions. Thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to our project manager, Sarah Gold, or turn it back to Sarah for a review of today's agenda and introductions.
Thanks, Beth. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Sarah Gold with Wills, and I'm one of the WSDLC project managers. And we want to thank you for being here with us today. Following our feature presentation by Joe, we will introduce our board and selection advisory committee for the 26-27 membership year. We will also share some impressive statistics, provide a look back at this year and a look forward to next year. We'll also share highlights from the member survey, which had the highest number of respondents ever. A successful project has many moving parts and people, and we are very fortunate to have a great group to support the WSDLC. In addition to myself, the project management team includes Lisa Martin, who provides financial support, including all invoicing. Rebecca Rosensteel wears many hats as the WSDLC project coordinator, and her especially notable contributions include both visual and written materials, including weekly newsletters, incredible graphics, the annual member survey, WSDLC website updates, and internally providing organization and detailed record keeping. Our Overdrive team is top-notch and includes Lindsay Christ Lawson, who joined our team this year as an account exec. She's providing support and training for WSDLC members. Amanda Azuga-Lawman, as our product support specialist, does all of the implementations for new and existing members. And Beth Saxton is our digital content librarian who does all of the selection and curation of titles for the shared collections. Corey Alford joined our team this year as an account exec, providing additional school support. And Lena Rose, who is our account manager, is currently on maternity leave, but she will be joining us again soon. So the WSDLC board is made up of elected members serving 3-year terms, appointed members who serve terms of either 1, 2, or 3 years. There are seats for representatives from each of the 12 CISAs, and there is a seat for a Department of Instruction representative. I'd like to give a special shout out of appreciation to our outgoing board members, Joanne Sobolik, Kate Lean, and Peg Billing, as well as shout outs to our chair, Beth Hennis, who will be returning, and vice chair, Brandy Grady. The selection advisory committee is made up of between 5 and 9 volunteers from member districts who serve staggered 2-year terms and are an integral part of keeping the collections diverse, equitable, and inclusive. The members also provide input on the collection development policy and the reconsideration process. I'd like to give a special thanks to Teresa Krako, who's whose term is up. Thank you, Teresa. And now I'm sorry, I'm not introducing Joe.
No, I'm
I'm
doing
turning
it.
that over to Beth.
All right. I'm very pleased to introduce Joe Sieracki. As a graphic novelist, Joe is a gifted writer. His works include A Letter to Joe from Top Shelf, Ghost of Science Past by Humanoids, and he has worked on series including Terror Bites and Speed Racer at Mad Cave. Joe is here to share his writing process and answers to your questions about what it's like to be a graphic novel author. Welcome, Joe.
Hey, Beth, thank you so much for having me. You guys hear me okay? All right. So, first of all, welcome everybody. And yes, I am a comic book writer. I've been doing this, I'd say, for about 5 years or so. I got my first book published. And since then, I have been working on some different titles. And just, I first of all, I think it's really cool that you were all interested in having um, a graphic novelist, comic book writer present at uh, this panel because, sometimes comics and graphic novels, they get a little bit of a bad rap, especially in the past. I think opinions kind of turning around on that a little bit, particularly in recent years. But there's still a lot of potential that I think is not being realized in comic books and graphic novels. So I'm going to kind of go through here, talk a little bit about me, my process, and then also, given that you are all so closely tied with education, as I am myself. I also want to talk a little bit about the implications of how graphic novels and this graphic medium of comics can be used for educational purposes as well. So if you want to flip the side, next slide, you get a little bit of information about me. I am a high school science teacher. Um, that is my occupation. I've been teaching high school science for 18 years. And throughout that time, I've always been a very big comics book fan. Ever since I was a little kid, I would grow up reading comics, everything from like Calvin and Hobbes, and then later reading things like Spider-Man. Spider-Man was always a big one for me. Something about that nerdy kid who, just he loved science so much, but he had a hard time kind of like finding his way. That really spoke to me, and then I ended up pursuing science later in life. But I always had this huge love of reading and writing, and comics was always just something that really spoke to me. And I kind of fell out of comics a little bit when I went on to college, and then I had a college professor that integrated a graphic novel. It was a trade paperback of a title that was essentially it was kind of like this neo. Uh, uh, Bombastic kind of. He was a reporter, and it was very political. It was in a poli sci class, and it kind of opened my mind to what comics could be and how it could elevate education in general. So that kind of brought me back to the medium, and I've really just been kind of in it ever since. And at some point, I was reading a book called Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi, and it also opened up my mind to how you can tell these personal stories, and kind of got me thinking about my own story, my family story, and maybe how I could potentially bring that into a graphic medium as well. And that led me to my first published book, which was A Letter to Joe. And that was a story that was a graphic novel centered around a letter that my grandfather had wrote my grandmother at the end of World War II, kind of detailing his experience in the war. And that was a huge, huge learning experience for me because while I had, I looked up scripts online, and I'd kind of like messed around with writing. Actually sitting down with an artist and an editor and kind of going through the process, I realized how much work actually goes into it. And from there, I got a lot more serious about what I was doing. And I started reading a lot of books on writing and graphic mediums and comics and just kind of the craft behind all of it. So every day, I try to read prose, I try to read comics, I try to stay up on industry news and speak with different industry pros. It's an ongoing thing. So when I'm talking to you all about my experience, I just want everybody to understand that I'm not trying to sound like I'm this, one authority. There's really, in my opinion, there's no one right way to approach comics. There's not a one right way to read them. There's not one right way to create them or write them. It's really just based on my own personal experience. So as I'm going through here, any questions that anyone has, if I'm, saying something that doesn't make sense or what is that, throw it in the chat. I would love for this to be as interactive as possible. And, anything that you are interested in about comics or graphic novels or, education, I would be happy to have that discussion. So please be as interactive as you want to throughout this. Okay. So if you want to flip to the next slide, one of the things that I was asked to talk about is just kind of my approach. And usually I'll start with a pitch. And a pitch is essentially a document that you create that is what is your story? What is it about? What's the hook? It's something to get the publisher interested in your book. So each publisher uses a different format. Most publishers also want to see some sort of sample pages that go along with that. This is the approach that I normally take, but others may take a completely different approach. Also depends on, I think, prior relationships that you have with the publisher as well. I've done some stories where I go straight to script, but I think the key to any story and what any publisher wants to know is that you have an idea where the story's going. So where the proposal might start in one place, once you start incorporating the collaboration from the artist, once you bring an editor onto the project, a lot of this can change once you eventually make it to the final thing that you're going to like see on the page. Okay, so if you want, you can flip to the next one. So this is a proposal for a book that I created called Ghosts of Science Past. And again, every book is going to have a slightly different approach. I had an idea that I wanted to create a book that could teach kids about science. So I'm a science teacher. For a long time, I've wanted to incorporate a graphic novel or a comic into the science curriculum that could kind of be a companion to the textbook. And I'll talk a little bit more about the differences between graphic medium and textbooks a little bit towards the end here. But this book was meant to, kind of get kids excited about science and incorporate some of the things that I know that my students always struggle with. So I had the idea of just using the framework of A Christmas Carol, where instead of being visited by these different ghosts of, the past and whatnot, these were ghosts of science. So we would take these difficult concepts and we would assign some of the most famous scientists that are well known for that. So I brought this idea to an artist. His name is Jesse Lonergan, and he really liked it. So he's like, "Yeah, let's do this." So I end up writing like a 4 to 5 page script just to start. We collaborate on the character designs and things like that, and we create sample pages to send along to the publisher, and then we send this document as well. So a lot of the things from this document, which was just meant to really garner interest from the publisher, ended up changing once we finally made it to the published book, like the look of Charles Darwin. We were going initially for kind of like a hip hop style. Well, that changed once we made it. We had ghosts like Niels Bohr. Well, we ended up changing out Niels Bohr for a more inclusive character that we thought might be more interesting. So this is, kind of like a starting place, a springboard. And you can flip to the next slide, please. It does include usually maybe not like a super detailed outline, but you can see I've got kind of the broad strokes of the story already in there. And again, a lot of this can change when we actually go to script. And you can flip to the next one. So what is a comic book script? So I know I've mentioned script a few times, and you guys probably aren't all that familiar with a comic book script. So first and foremost, there is no set format for a comic book script. If you took a comic book script from 10 of the most prominent comic book writers in the world today, every single one of them is going to look completely different. So there's no one set format. When I started doing this, I would find templates and examples from books and online, and I would just kind of take from those and incorporate parts of it that I liked, parts that I didn't like, try to find something that works for me. But it's also incredibly important that you're taking an approach that is good for the artists. So I cannot stress enough that when you are making a graphic novel or you're working within a graphic medium, it's a collaborative process. So ultimately, you need a comic book script that works for you and that works for the artist. It's got to be clear, it's got to be understandable. I usually work in what's called full script, meaning I break every panel down with a description, and then you'll also have like dialogue and captions and things that you would see on the page, like that panel there that says Trevor, which is a teacher trying to wake him up. So you can flip to the next slide, and we will see an example of a 7-panel page that I had written. So each panel, it's got a description of what's going on. Caption is the words that you're seeing on the page. Sound effects, you need to put that in there as well. Dialogue, it has all of that. Usually when I'm writing this, I try to visualize in my mind what's happening in the scene, what's happening on the page. And then I'm just trying to, as succinctly as possible, convey all of this to the artist. Now, different writers will approach this in different ways. I try to make this just a good springboard for the artist, a place to start. Never would I write a script where I would say this needs to be followed exactly. Usually the artists have their own ideas that they want to incorporate into it. And that's kind of the magic I feel in making comics. What you start with and what you end with can be, again, completely different, but in my experience, a lot better for that collaboration. So if you want to skip to the next one. This shows some of the initial character sketches that Jesse Lonergan did for this book. So the first 5 on the left, this was the main character. His name is Trevor. He's kind of a proxy for the reader and the students that may be learning these different topics from these famous scientists throughout the book. So we had some different looks that we were choosing from. And then on the right, these were some of the initial looks for Charles Darwin, which ended up actually evolving even further once we went to the published pages, which you'll see here in just a moment. So you can continue there. So these are what are called layouts. So initially, when I'll hand over the script, an artist will begin with basically just kind of like sketching out the panels, getting a rough idea of what's the panel going to look like, where are the characters going to go, where is the dialogue and stuff going to fit in. This is the point where, as a writer or an editor working on the book, this is where you want to really bring your suggestions, because these are, while they can be very time consuming and they involve a lot of thought and effort on the artist, they haven't committed pencil and ink to the page yet. So this is really where you want to give your feedback, if there's any feedback, like maybe I want to pull back a little further on this. Maybe I need to show this in this panel. But this gives you an opportunity to, potentially include some additions or changes. And then if you want to move to the next slide, now we have the ink. So here he's penciled the page and he's inked the page. Now, different artists work in different ways. Jesse works traditionally, which means he does actual pencil and paper, and then he directly inks right over those lines with a ink brush. Others might work on an iPad or another tablet of some sort. Many artists now use digital means of producing their art. And by digital, I mean like they're using like an Apple Pen. I don't mean like AI art. They are still physically drawing the pages, but at the end, they wouldn't have a physical artifact. Um, Again, one's not necessarily better than the other. Digital can sometimes be a little bit faster. You can also be a little bit easier to make changes. But a lot of artists, they like that tactile pencil and ink experience. And sometimes you get some happy accidents along the way when you're doing it this way. If you want to flip to the next page. Now we have the colors. Now, oftentimes on projects that I'll work on, your pencil inker and your colorist are two different people. So sometimes, and oftentimes, in fact, the colorist is a completely different person. On this project, Jesse also handled the colors. So he is an accomplished colorist as well as an artist. In fact, I believe he was just got a Eisner nomination for a book that he did this year, in which he got nominated for the colors. So he goes through and then he digitally colored these. So these are not hand painted. Some artists will actually hand paint on the art as directly, and I'll show some examples of that as well. And then if you want to go to the next slide, this is a different page where you can see in the layouts, he's indicating where some of the panel captions and on the left and the dialogue is going to go. And again, this would be outlined in the script that he was given. And then another person is doing the lettering, which you see on the right. So they're taking all the words from the script and they're putting it into these different places in the art. Sometimes the letterist, they choose kind of the flow of where it's going and what it's looking like. Jesse's a little bit more hands-on. He wanted some control as to where that placement was happening. And you can go to the next slide. This is another example. This was a book that I did where I was collaborating with an artist by the name of Miguel Hernandez. We were contacted by a local sewer district in Northeast Ohio that wanted to put out comics for kids that would teach them about clean water in Northeast Ohio. So they asked that we create this superhero team that would help with clean water and at the same time teach kids about, and responsible environmental stewardship. So you can see his roughs are a little bit different than Jesse's. Jesse's were a little bit more detailed. Miguel's a little bit rougher. Again, there's no one right way to do it. You can go to the next slide. Here's an example of a script from A Letter to Joe, that book that I mentioned about my grandparents at the beginning. This one was done by an artist named Kelly Williams. Now he does actually pencil ink on paper, and then he uses hand painted watercolors that he puts directly on the page. So he is coloring it directly on that tactile paper. And then he scans it in, and a letterer will come in and start transferring the dialogue and the captions over to the page. And you can go to the next one. Sometimes you don't have any dialogue or captions at all. So this was a page that I wrote for an artist named Jared Cullum. This is a completely silent page. So this is tricky. You look at a page like this and you say, oh, okay, well, the writer didn't do any work at all. Well, it's actually a lot harder to tell a story without any dialogue or captions and just completely doing it visually and graphically. And again, it takes a lot of storytelling know-how and expertise from the artist as well to be able to get these ideas across just visually without a single word on the page. You can go to the next one. So everything that I've been showing you right now, that's considered full script. This is not the only way to make comics. There is a completely different style called Marvel style because it was developed at Marvel by Stan Lee, primarily when he was working with a large number of different artists at once. So it was kind of a time-saving thing where he would just call somebody like Jack Kirby or Steve Ditko in the office and say, okay, here's my idea for this story, and this is going to happen, that's going to happen, and go ahead and make me 20 pages on that. So there goes Jack Kirby, and he's just taken this broad stroke idea that that Stan would give him, and then he would completely create this story from it. And then afterward, Stan would then come in from the panels, and then he would start adding the captions and adding the dialogue. So kind of completely doing it backwards, almost in a way, where he provided the general idea and concept of the story, but really Jack was the one that was doing the storytelling, and then Stan came in and put the things that you would see on the page afterward. If you flip to the next slide, you'll see an example of this. So he kind of just wrote like, a couple paragraphs and the characters. And then from that, there goes Jack, and he's writing this, completely, different, maybe somewhat similar story, but in many ways, it's, what Jack was doing. If you want to flip to the next slide, each method has its advantages and disadvantages. I've heard from a lot of different artists they would love to do a Marvel style story, but at the time there was some questionable business practices where a lot of artists who did a lot of this work and the storytelling and the creating of these stories and these characters, they didn't get the credit for it. So when you create a story like this, while it can be more collaborative and maybe more creative in a lot of ways, there's questions as to, well, who actually is creating the story? Who's writing this story? So, I've never actually tried it this way. I would like to, though. And I know a lot of writers today where, they won't simply just give, a couple paragraphs. It'll really be a little bit more detailed than that. So again, there's different ways of going about this. You can flip to the next one. And again, anybody, if you have anything at all as I'm going through here that you want to ask about or comments or whatever, just throw it in the chat. But so ultimately the function of a comic book script, it is communicating to the artist what needs to be on the page. Like I'm not necessarily talking to the reader when I am writing. I'm talking to the artist. Okay, so I need to be clear about the story, what needs to be on the page, what are the characters, what's the point of the scene. I need to make that clear. If I'm not doing that, then I'm really not doing my job. So what makes a good comic script? If you flip to the next one, these are all the things that you want to make sure that you are including on the next slide here in any comic book script to make sure that you are doing your job. Okay, so I don't need to read all those. We can just continue. I certainly don't want to go too long and keep everybody. Things to watch out for. I probably more aptly title this mistakes that I have made. So my first comic book experience, writing a letter to Joe, I learned so much. A lot of the times I would have too many things happening in one panel. I would have actions that, these are static images. The reader fills in a lot of blanks in their mind when you're moving from one panel to the next. But asking an artist to, like take a cup and set it down and then pick it back up, like this would have to be shown in multiple panels if that's really important. So you really need to think about sequential storytelling, how you're telling that story and how we can get this across. So you have to be careful. Comics are not animation. You don't want to overload the page. It's a visual medium. You need to keep that in mind. And I think really just keeping an open dialogue with the artist is the best way to do that. And you can flip to the next one. So a lot of people will often ask, well, okay, well, where do you get your ideas for story? Like, where did you get that idea from? And I think basically ideas can come from anywhere. I've never really gotten an idea from another comic book, but I do, again, try to immerse myself in all kinds of different media. I've gotten ideas from prose, movies, TV shows. As long as I feel like you are open and receptive to ideas and you're actively like looking for things that you want to write about, I think the ideas will come to you. And as long as you're vigilant about that, and by that I mean like writing them down and kind of developing them, it's going to come to you. So like really like my notes app on my phone because I'm constantly just jotting down ideas. I have pages and pages and pages and pages of notes that I will absolutely never use. But once in a while, I'll write down some ideas and they kind of keep sticking in the back of my mind. And that's when I know that's something that I really want to pursue, something that's important to me that I want to kind of go deeper into. And then I created a running document where I'm just writing pages of ideas for this story. And most of it's going to get thrown away, but some of it gets incorporated in the story, some of it changes. That's just kind of something that you have to actively, I think, be thinking about and doing if you want these kinds of ideas to go anywhere. So some helpful tips, if you go to the next slide for writers, it's really just incorporating what's important to you into stories. Like something I tried really hard when I was first writing, I tried to, sound, really smart in my panel description. That doesn't matter. You just need to be clear. Don't try to be too flashy. You got to focus, I've found, on characters and their arcs and not the plot. The plot is, kind of like the pushing the story along, but it's ultimately about what is your character trying to achieve, what stands in their way. Even three-act structure, which is kind of like the most basic structure of any story, is not really about plot. Okay. You got to think about what you want to say in the story. Like, what are you trying to get across? And that should drive like every decision that your character is making and what's happening to your character and where your character starts and where your character ends. And again, these are things that I did not necessarily focus on when I started, but going through different classes and reading and learning about the craft, it's really changed my perspective on story and my understanding of how to create stories. If you want to go to the next one, then I'm going to go ahead and read this. I know this is, it's never fun when somebody reads a slide, but this is important, I think. So, graphic storytelling and visual narratives. This is by a guy by the name of Will Eisner, and he arguably made the very first graphic novel, A Contract to God, which is, I highly recommend if no one has read it. He's also very well known for the spirit strips that he would do. And he was one of the first to really advocate for the medium and treat it like it was literature. And he said in text, acquisition requires literacy, which involves thought, participation, recall. Readers convert words into imagery. Okay, so some people they struggle with that, right? Especially kids. It can be hard to do that. I mean, not everybody when they are reading a text visualizes it to a high degree or is even able to do that. So comics, I feel they have a leg up on text in that way because in comics, and again, I'll read from the slide, acquisition is less demanding than the text because the imagery is provided. The quality of the telling hinges on the arrangement of the text and images. There's a lot of thought put into this. The reader is expected to participate. Okay, that's huge. The reader is expected to participate. Reading the imagery requires experience and allows acquisition at the viewer's pace. I think that's important for learning. And the reader must internally provide sound and action and support of images. So in film, you sit back, you watch, you're a spectator. But when you're reading a comic, you are a participant. The magic of comics, for me, it happens between the panels. Okay. Student or whoever is reading a panel and they're seeing what's on the next panel and they're moving to the next one, but in their minds, they're imagining what's happening from one to the next. Okay. And I think that is the absolute magic of comics. And that is what makes comics so valuable as a storytelling medium and for educational purposes. So if you want to flip to the next one, here's where I dog on textbooks a little bit. So my opinion, and I think I don't know, maybe most educators would probably agree that textbooks don't do the best job of getting students excited. Maybe even history teachers who I know can often rely, not all, of course, okay, but I know the history book can kind of be the foundation for a course, but they can always be a little bit one-sided, maybe not as engaging. So why not just use textbook? I think if you want to get kids excited, you need to look a little bit outside the textbook. And if you want to flip to the next one, I created Ghosts of Science Past because, I said before, I had looked for different comics that I thought would be good for the class. I had some I really liked, but nothing quite fit. So we went and we tried to make one that would be perfect as kind of this companion piece to a ninth grade science class. I've actually used this in my own classroom. I've shared at the end of this presentation some different resources, guided readings and projects, and discussions and different things that can go along with this. So the reason that I'm saying this is not because I'm like, you need to use my book or this is the right way to do it. I'm just trying to make the point that I believe strongly that comic books and graphic novels and this medium is underutilized in education. And I think that the more we open our minds to it, the more we are going to engage kids in topics that I think they otherwise might not. Okay. And if you want to flip to the next one, Gen Ed versus art here. In comics, it's all about showing and telling. It's a graphic medium. So in our book, we try to utilize the medium as much as possible. I think that's that kind of visual aspect to it. Kids will connect with that and it'll help them to better understand concepts that if you're just reading the text, you may not understand what the text is saying. But if you have these accompanying images that go along with it and you're telling a story with it, I think that's going to just come across more readily to them. So just the utilization of that, I just would love to be able to see more of that in education. And if you want to move to the next one, comics are inclusive. We try to keep. So I'm bringing these different scientists in with different backgrounds, ones that you wouldn't normally see in a textbook. So like Marie Curie or Chun Wu, you're not going to find that in a textbook that you have all the time in a high school classroom. So there's those types of opportunities, but also we try to keep the dialogue very conversational. I try to take conversations that I've had with students and the kinds of questions and difficulties that they have. And the main character, Trevor, as a proxy for the student, they're asking the same kinds of questions. And we're going through, those conversations and those problems and reaching to a place where they'll have a better understanding of that content. And if you want to move to the next one. I also just think, kids, they can be sometimes, and especially, I don't know, in recent years, I felt like this has gotten more and more. Like kids don't want to ask questions as much as I felt like they used to when I first started teaching. So maybe it's that they're scared to, or I don't know, they just don't know the right questions to ask. Well, the comics can help them engage in maybe a safer line of questioning in an interesting way. So again, just different ways of reaching kids, I think, is the main thing here. And if you want to move to the last one, I think, this is just kind of showing some of the goals that we had with our book here, making the topics more relatable, including underrepresented scientists that you wouldn't find in normal textbooks, getting the kids to feel like that they're spending the time with these characters. I just don't know that that's something that a textbook can do. And last slide. I would love if you guys had any questions or anything that you wanted to throw out there, but there's that link to some of the resources that I've used in my classroom in the past. And even if you're not using this book, maybe that gives you an idea of how you can incorporate some other graphic novels or comics into your classroom. Because I'll tell you, for any subject that you can think of, I promise you that there are worthwhile graphic novels and comics out there that anybody can integrate into any classroom at any level. And then, that's pretty much the presentation. Unless anybody has any questions, I would love to take some. So the question is, how do you go about selecting the sample you send to publishers? Is a particular selection that you're most proud of? That's an excellent question. So it does. So a lot of people, they'll just start with the beginning of the story. So maybe the first 5 pages or something like that. In my in my experience, it doesn't necessarily need to be the first 5 pages. It needs to be 5 engaging pages that shows the character, the theme, what the book is going to be about. So you want it to be interesting in both the theme and the topics, but also visually engaging as well. So you want something, honestly, that looks cool, because I know everybody says don't judge a book by its cover, but when it kind of comes to comic books, I mean, that's the first thing that anybody's going to look at, the art on the cover. And if they don't like the art on the cover or the first couple pages they're seeing, they're probably not going to want to read anymore. Oh, and thank you for putting the link to the Google Drive there. So if anybody wants to check out those materials, by all means, it is shared out there and you guys can grab whatever you want, change whatever you want. You have my full permission to do so if you're interested in using any of those. Any other
Thanks, Joe.
questions?
Thanks, Joe. I just wanted to let everybody know that Ghosts of Science Past is available in the WSDLC. So if you want to take a peek, we encourage you to do so.
Yeah, for sure.
I also have a question. For people that are in, how do you ask permission or beg forgiveness in terms of incorporating um graphic novels and other sorts of resources into your teaching?
So so ask forgiveness or from whom do you mean? Do you mean like
Um,
in
just
making the book or administrators or parents?
I'm
Like which
I'm I'm
audience are you
thinking
referring to?
about administrators. So
Okay.
if you weren't the author of the works and somebody who's watching this wants to integrate um
Yeah.
resources such as graphic novels, which I think are an outstanding, I'm a huge reader of graphic novels myself as an adult. Um, how what is the reception? And I suppose
Yeah.
that might vary by district.
Yeah,
Um,
so 100%. I think first of all, that's an excellent question. Um, and so as an educator myself, I did ask permission to include my own book in my classroom. So we, and I know I'm speaking to many librarians here, so you are more aware of this than anyone else. We live in strange times where a lot of books are really under the gun here and under fire, and books are getting banned. So I think it's probably wise to ask before including any sort of text outside of a textbook in a classroom. Um, that's something that I've personally done as well. I don't know if I would necessarily be comfortable including something that wasn't first approved, especially as you've seen a lot of educators under fire for some of the things that you wouldn't necessarily think are not worthy of being in a classroom, and especially comics too, especially like books that are. I mentioned Persepolis, but I'm pretty sure Persepolis has been used in like colleges and high schools. I'm pretty sure that's been banned in a number of places. Mouse, one of the most powerful graphic novels of all time. I think the only one that's ever won a Pulitzer has been banned in a number of places. So yeah, I think you while we need to consider these different options, I do think if you just for your own safety, you do need to make sure that everybody understands what's in there prior to going into it. So yeah, I'm of the mind probably ask for permission. So we got a question here about lettering. Do they add that at the end digitally? Do they hand letter those sometimes, or is it a font? And do you use the author ever step back in, or do you leave the text choice back to the illustrator? So these are all good questions. So previously, so when the first comics started coming out, all comics were hand lettered. It was an art in and of itself. And again, usually they would be separate people. You would have the guy that would or woman that would go and draw and ink, and then some separate person would come in and then hand letter those pages. Occasionally, you will still see artists that like to hand letter, but for the most part, all lettering is done digitally for a number of reasons. One, you can edit digital lettering. So usually, when I get what's called a lettering pass. So after the letterer goes through and they letter everything, I'll get to go through and say, okay, maybe this doesn't look right here, or maybe I need to change a couple words here. That's a much easier to do if it's all digitally. And then, yeah, there's always going to be conversations prior to with the artist and the editor and the writer, all the fonts and the styles. We tried to pick for Ghost of Science Past kind of like a shaky kind of font that was similar to the line that Jesse uses in his art. So you want it to kind of flow and match what's on the page as well. Yeah, good question. All good questions. Anything else that you guys want to know about making comics or using comics or anything else? All right.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Joe. I know that was, for me, that was incredible to hear all that. And I had no idea just how much goes into creating comic books and graphic novels and the whole order that the whole process can go in, and the idea that the writer is writing for the artist and not necessarily for the reader, at least right away. And that was just wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you all so much again for having me. Again, I can't stress enough what I think you are all doing is amazing. And again, I just appreciate you letting me talk here, and I hope you guys all can at some point at least enjoy a comic. Go enjoy a comic.
And I'll be doing that this afternoon after
All right.
this. All right. Well, thank you again. And yes, we truly appreciate you joining us today as well and sharing the process and your work. And you are more than welcome to stick around for the rest of the meeting as we cover a little bit about the consortium, or you can also feel free to take off and end your day and go do whatever it is you want to do.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
All right, so we'll chug right along here and just jump into a few things about the consortium before we do end for the day. First off is the results of this year's WSDLC board election and selection advisory committee appointments. There were 5 CISA region board seats. Sorry, my slides didn't turn. There they go. All right. There were 5 CISA region board seats that were open for election this spring and voted by the WSDLC membership to serve for their CISA regions. And those folks were in CISA 8, Michelle Gobert at Wabeno Area School District. Apologies if there's any mispronunciations there. CISA 9 had Abby Barrel from the School District of Rhinelander. And CISA 11, Caitlin was elected to serve from St. Croix Falls School District. Additionally, Kimberly Navarro from the School District of Menominee area was appointed by the current board to serve in an appointed seat for 2 years. And then we also had a great roster of selection advisory committee volunteers. And to keep the committee at an odd number, the WSDLC board appointed or reappointed 6 individuals to serve on the committee for a 2-year term. We have Julie Belangi from the School District of Thorpe, Kate Olson from the School District of La Crosse, and Anita Pack at Hamilton School District, who have been reappointed. And joining newly this coming September will be Nick Kotek from the School District of Cadott Community School. We have Tanya Strandberg Bauer from Wausau School District and Monica Treptow from Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. Many thank yous again to our departing board and selection advisory committee members, to everyone who volunteered to serve in these roles, and to the WSDLC membership for your role in voting. And another congratulations to everyone who will be serving beginning on September 1st. It's the WSDLC's governance that helps make this such a great and valuable consortium, so just extra thank yous all around. Continuing on and switching gears, we'll take a look back at 2025. And of course, we need to start with all the amazing milestones that the shared digital collection reached last year. Students are checking out books like they're going out of style, which we all know they aren't, but the Sora collections reached not just 7 million total checkouts in 2025, but also hit 8 million and the 9 million total lifetime checkout, which is really just an amazing feat, especially so many in just one calendar year. And even though it happened this year in 2026, when we really only wanted to talk about 2025, the 10 millionth checkout does need to get that shout out because that is just the biggest and like most exciting um, milestone to see in a shared collection. And we're just very excited that the collections have seen so much love and usage over the past 8 years. Kind of zooming out a little bit, and speaking of 8 years of the WSDLC, what began as a small collection serving about 86 Wisconsin school districts and 94,000 students has blossomed and grown into reaching 332 school districts, both public and private, and nearly 520,000 students across the state. That's right around 66% of all Wisconsin students having access to the shared digital collection. 2025 checkouts continued to exceed previous years, with 2.2 million total checkouts, a 21% increase over the previous year. And the number of students checking out materials and using the collections has also continued to grow, with 88,000 total users, over 24,000, around 69,000. And of these 88,000 students in 2025, about 29,000 of those were brand new users checking out titles in Sora for the very first time. And with more school districts joining the WSDLC and more usage, of course, we're spending more. In 2025, the consortium spent over $620,000 on content for the shared collections, adding 398,000 copies of ebooks, audiobooks, comic books, read-alongs, and more, and also 8,424 completely new titles. And speaking of spending, I'm now going to pass it back over to Sarah to talk about the consortium's usage of CPC purchasing model in 2025.
Thanks, Rebecca. So with that growth that was just shared, demand on titles, particularly popular titles, has absolutely exploded. Purchasing hundreds of copies of titles is not the most efficient or economical way to manage demand, so enter cost per circ, or what we call CPC. This program allows the WSDLC to provide titles as they are needed on a per-use basis. On the back end, we select titles identified as high demand that are available as CPC, and then we assign a maximum dollar amount for these titles and turn the project or turn the program on. On the front end, the process is seamless with students seeing titles as available rather than having to place holds. So in 2025, we did a CPC pilot with Battle of the Books titles. We spent a little over $9,200 on those titles and had over 8,100 checkouts. The pilot was so successful in terms of cost savings and accessibility that we now incorporate CPC regularly. And those titles have had over 24,000 checkouts in 2026 so far. So CPC is also available to individual member districts. If you're interested, please reach out to Lindsay and the Overdrive team to learn more. In a continuing effort to support members, the WSDLC Overdrive team worked with a group of library staff from WSDLC member schools and the project managers to develop a new training resources page that covers the topics WSDLC members most want to know about and how they like to learn. That information can be found in a link that I'll put in the chat. The WSDLC managers are interested in making changes to help maximize efficient engagement among the WSDLC board and selection advisory committee. They met with project managers of other consortia to learn about efficiencies and workflows that can better support our consortium. And a significant outcome from that meeting is exploring new geographic areas for board member recruitment and representation, which some board members, along with the project managers, will be working on over the summer. And we look forward to implementing what we learn and decide on in 2026. And then just a quick reminder that new this year is that content credit expires after 1 year from the date of purchase. So the WSDLC Overdrive team is on top of this and has reached out to any member district with content credit that will be expiring over the summer. However, if you have questions, please reach out to the WSDLC Overdrive team at wsdlc@overdrive.com. And I'll go ahead and turn this over to Rebecca to share highlights from the 2026 membership survey.
Thank you, Sarah. And we are kind of running up on time, so I'm going to go real quick through these. This year we shortened the survey down from about 30 plus question survey that can take up to 15 minutes to complete down to a 12 question survey that only takes about 5 minutes to complete. The survey was open from late February through about mid-March, and we had a record response rate this year. The annual survey typically receives around 60 responses, but this year nearly doubled that with 118 responses. So thank you to everyone who took the time to respond. Your responses directly impact how the WSDLC moves forward, and you'll see some of those results kind of peppered through the last few slides of today's meeting. You can review the full survey report at the Canva link that I'll be dropping into the chat. And beyond that, some things that we picked up is marketplace usage. Over 50 or nearly 50% of respondents do log into their Advantage account regularly. A good portion of the folks who indicated they aren't logging in regularly is because someone else at their district is handling that for their district. Big thing about training needs that really took us is that 90% of respondents prefer to learn by pre-recorded self-paced webinars or by text-based guides. So we'll be sharing out Overdrive's Resource Center a little more often as they have step-by-step detailed descriptions on how to do pretty much everything in that short guided format. 17 comments indicated a need for new user training sessions, which we are already working on some of that, and one of those you've already seen come through perhaps. Consortium features, we wanted to see what was working for the consortium. 51% of respondents find value in the curated Advantage bundle carts, and 25 respondents were unaware of the Battle of the Book support through the cost per circ titles, so we know we can be a little more instrumental about that. And finally, we checked in on project management, how folks are feeling about communications and response times and the whole invoicing and renewal process. And over 96% of survey takers indicated satisfaction in all areas of project management. And again, you can read the full report with a few more details and areas themed out through the survey report that is linked in the chat. All right, and then looking ahead at what's to come, directly informed from the survey, we are planning more self-paced training webinars. In fact, Overdrive just released one this last week. Lindsay led that, so do check that out if you haven't had a chance yet. Gonna add that to the chat as well. There we are. But we're also planning to release a kind of new member orientation webinar at the start of the 26-27 school year, so keep your eyes open for that. Project managers and the board are always keeping an eye on the WSDLC budget, and this past spring felt comfortable and confident in slowing down the previously approved membership fee increases. Not only that, but they are also more slowly increasing the per student costs over the course of the following 2 years. We'll keep reviewing the funds and making sure that the WSDLC continues to be a sustainable option for members. And these last two items came up during the project manager think tank that Sarah just talked about a few slides ago. The first or third on this slide, when the WSDLC was formed, seating the board based on CISA regions was a solid way to make sure there was a rounded representation of districts making decisions that would affect the full consortium. And while this is still true, there may be other ways to populate the board that would allow for greater representation of WSDLC member districts that CISAs might miss. So the board has developed a subcommittee and will be meeting this summer to explore other possibilities. And the last item here, a lot of time and thought goes into making sure the WSDLC's guiding documents and policies are up to date, reflecting current practices and making sure the consortium is representing and supporting members in appropriate ways. So we have a few plans that we're hopeful will help ease those document review processes and leave more room for the board and the committee to do more with their time. All right, so I went through those last few slides pretty quick, but we are here. We made it. Does anyone have any final questions today before we wrap up? All right, I'm not seeing anything coming through the chat and not seeing any, I think there's a hand raise feature. So if you're typing something in, keep going and we'll make sure to address it before the end here. But I do want to make sure we don't go over by too much more in our time. So wrapping up, we just want to make sure you all have the contact information that you could need. From the survey, some folks indicated that they are interested in knowing what other districts are doing with SORA, and the WSDLC-members listserv is a great way to know. Members can send their questions or crowdsourcing ideas out to the listserv and see what kind of responses they get. If you aren't on the listserv, we do have a sign-up form linked here into the chat on the slide, and I'll be dropping that into the chat. If you aren't sure if you're on the listserv or not, the project managers do send out a newsletter every first and third Tuesday of the month. So if you see those, you are on the listserv. If you're not seeing those, you are either not on the listserv or those might be directing into the spam folder. So you can check that out. And either way, if you sign up for the listserv, we'll make sure you know which one it is. You can reach out to project managers at wsdlc-info@wills.org if you have any questions about your WSDLC membership, invoicing renewals, what have you there. And reach out to the WSDLC SORA Overdrive team if you have any questions about SORA, Marketplace, or if you'd like to schedule any one-on-one trainings. All right, and that brings us to the end. Thank you so much for joining us today or for watching the recording. This consortium would not be what it is without you all. So take care, everyone. Thank you very much.